Hello, welcome to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this upload, we'll be reading 1 Kings chapter 14. At that time, Abijah, the son of Jeroboam, fell sick, and Jeroboam said to his wife, "Arise, I pray thee, and disguise thyself, that thou be not known to be the wife of Jeroboam, and get thee to Shiloh. Behold, there is Ahijah the prophet, which told me that I should be king over this people, and take with thee 10 loaves and crackles, and a cruse of honey, and go to him. He shall tell thee what shall become of the child." And Jeroboam's wife did so, and arose and went to Shiloh, and came to the house of Ahijah. But Ahijah could not see, for his eyes were set by reason of his age. And the Lord said unto Ahijah, Behold, the wife of Jeroboam cometh to ask a thing of thee for her son, for he is sick. Thus and thus shalt thou say unto her, for it shall be, when she cometh in, that she shall feign herself to be another woman. And it was so, when Ahijah heard the sound of her feet, as she came in at the door, that he said, Come in, thou wife of Jeroboam. Why feignest thou thyself to be another? For I am sent to thee with heavy tidings. Go, tell Jeroboam, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, For as much as I exalted thee from among the people, and made thee prince over my people Israel, and rent the kingdom away from the house of David, and gave it thee, and yet thou hast not been as my servant David, who kept my commandments, and who followed me with all his heart to do that only which was right in mine eyes, but hast done evil above all that were before thee. For thou hast gone and made thee other gods and molten images to provoke me to anger, and hast cast me behind thy back. Therefore, behold, I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel, and will take away the remnant of the house of Jeroboam, as a man taketh away dung, till it be all gone. Him that dieth of Jeroboam in the city shall the dogs eat, and him that dieth in the field shall the fowls of the air eat, for the Lord hath spoken it. Arise thou therefore, get thee to thine own house, and when thy feet enter into the city, the child shall die. And all Israel shall mourn for him, and bury him, for he only of Jeroboam shall come to the grave, because in him there was found some good thing toward the Lord God of Israel in the house of Jeroboam. Moreover, the Lord shall raise him up a king over Israel, who shall cut off the house of Jeroboam that day. But what, even now? For the Lord shall smite Israel, as a reed is shaken in the water. And he shall root up Israel out of this good land, which he gave to their fathers, and shall scatter them beyond the river, because they have made their groves provoking the Lord to anger. And he shall give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, who did sin, and who made Israel to sin. And Jeroboam's wife arose and departed, and came to Tirzah. And when she came to the threshold of the door, the child died. And they buried him, and all Israel mourned for him, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by the hand of his servant Ahijah the prophet. And the rest of the acts of Jeroboam, how he warred and how he reigned, behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the king of Israel. And the days which Jeroboam reigned were 22 years, and he slept with his fathers, and Nadab his son reigned in his stead. And Rehoboam the son of Solomon reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord did choose out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. And his mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess. And Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins which they had committed, above all that their fathers had done. For they also built them high places and images and groves on every high hill, and under every green tree. And there were also Sodomites in the land, and they did according to all the abominations of the nations, which the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. And it came to pass in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. And he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house. He even took away all, and he took away all the shields of gold which Solomon had made. And King Rehoboam made in their stead brazen shields, and committed them unto the hand of the chief of the guard, which kept the door of the king's house. And it was so, when the king went into the house of the Lord, that the guard bare them, and brought them back into the guard chamber. Now the rest of the acts of Rehoboam, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all their days. And Rehoboam slept with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And his mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess, and Abijam his son reigned in his stead. 1 Kings chapter 13. An unnamed man of God gives Jeroboam a prophecy about a new king from David's lineage that will destroy the current order. An unnamed prophet lies to the unnamed man of God, saying that God approves of them eating together. The man of God is killed by a lion. 1 Kings 14. Abijah, King Jeroboam's son, gets sick. Jeroboam tells his wife to visit Ahijah, the prophet, to disguise herself and bring gifts. Ahijah gives the prophecy the child will die. Rehoboam's kingdom, Judah, also disobeys God and participates in idol worship. The king of Egypt takes the valuables out of the temple Solomon built. Jeroboam's son, Nadab, rules after his death. Rehoboam's son, Abijah, rules after his death. Okay, before I review chapter 14, just want to go over the first 13 chapters. So in 1 Kings chapter 1, King David is dying. His son Adonijah tries to exalt himself as king. Joab and Abiathar both turn against David to help advise Adonijah. So this is a big deal because Joab is David's military captain and Abiathar is one of David's priests. So as David is dying, two of his men that have been counseling him, they turn on him to help his son Adonijah stage a hostile takeover of David's kingdom as he's dying. So David's wife, Bathsheba, and his prophet Nathan both work together with David to quickly establish Solomon as the new king. 1 Kings chapter 2. King David gives Solomon, his son, his final instructions. David dies, and Solomon becomes king. Adonijah, the son who tried to stage a hostile takeover in the previous chapter, now he makes a request to Solomon to have Abishag to wife. And the significance of this, Abishag was David's companion as he was dying. And so now that David is dead, he wasn't able to become king through the hostile takeover. So now that Solomon's king, at least maybe he could have Abishag since his father David is dead. So Solomon does not grant this request. Solomon has Adonijah put to death. Solomon then condemns Abiathar to exile, and Abiathar was one of David's employees, one of his priests, who turns against David as he's dying to help counsel Adonijah to stage a takeover of David's kingdom. So Solomon condemns this priest to exile, and he makes an agreement with Shimei. Now, Shimei is a man from 2 Samuel 16, David's other son, Absalom, over the course of 40 years, staged a hostile takeover because he wanted to be king. And so that one was such a bad experience for David. David had to run barefoot and crying from his own kingdom to try to, because his first son Absalom was able to turn so much of the kingdom away from David. David had a really tough reign as king. So I did cover that, but his son Absalom was able to provoke that and turn people against him. So as David's running, there's a man, Shimei. Shimei throws rocks and insults at David. So now that David is dead, Solomon makes an agreement with this man and says, I won't kill you if you stay in this city. Shimei breaks that agreement, and Solomon orders his death. 1 Kings chapter 3, God contacts King Solomon in a dream, and Solomon asks for an understanding heart and discernment. This chapter details Solomon's famous judgment of two women and their child, or a child. 1 Kings chapter 4. This chapter documents King Solomon's staff, their daily kingdom provisions, and the wealth. This chapter illustrates Solomon's honorable character, inspiring peace in Israel. We learn that Solomon wrote 1,005 songs. King Solomon became famous for his wisdom. 1 Kings chapter 5. King Tyre agrees to have men in his kingdom help King Solomon build a temple for Israel. They agree that King Solomon will provide King Tyre's kingdom food provision in exchange. In 1 Kings chapter 6, by the time we get to 1 Kings chapter 6, this is 480 years after Israel leaves Egypt under Moses' leadership. This is Solomon's 4th year as king. Solomon begins building Israel's first temple. This is a national temple for Israel. The specific measurements are given, and it takes 7 years for Solomon to complete this. 1 Kings chapter 7. Solomon spends 13 years building his own home and another in Lebanon. Specific measurements and details are listed. In 1 Kings chapter 8, the Ark of the Covenant is placed in Solomon's temple. Now, this ark, the significance is it's a historical piece, but it's also a sacred item. This was created under Moses' leadership in Exodus 37. And so now that Solomon has built the first Israelite temple, we have this historical piece that is sacred to the Israelites that's now able to go inside of that temple. 1 Kings chapter 9, God appears to Solomon a second time, admonishing him to keep his commands or endure severe punishment. We learn more details about King Solomon and King Tyre's agreement before they began constructing the temple. 1 Kings chapter 10, Queen of Sheba interrogates Solomon and brings expensive gifts to him. She returns home. There is no, in my opinion, I don't believe there's any sort of information that would suggest this was romantic or sexual. It seemed like she just wanted to know if the rumors she heard about Solomon were true. So we get some more specifics on Solomon's wealth. 1 Kings chapter 11, Solomon acquires 700 wives and 300 concubines. In verse 7, he begins building temples to these new women, the gods of these women. So Hadad and Rezon become adversaries to Solomon at this time. They actually have issues with Solomon's father, David, who's now dead. But after Solomon turns against God, these two men now cause a disturbance to the peace that Solomon had. Solomon chooses Jeroboam to be a supervisor of forced labor. So Jeroboam is an employee of Solomon. Ahijah the prophet tells this man, Jeroboam, that he's going to be king next because of Solomon's disobedience. Solomon then tries to kill him, and Jeroboam flees to Egypt until Solomon's death. After Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam becomes king. In 1 Kings chapter 12, Solomon's son Rehoboam attends the ceremony that Israel now is having to have the new king. Israel requests better conditions, and Rehoboam rudely denies them. Israel rejects Rehoboam as king. After this, Rehoboam sends one of his supervisors to try to reprimand Israel, and Israel stones the man to death. So Rehoboam was terrified, and he goes to Judah where he knows he can rule in peace. Out of fear. Okay, so after that, Israel makes Jeroboam, Solomon's former employee. Israel agrees to make Jeroboam their king. Out of fear, Jeroboam constructs 2 golden calf gods so that Israel will not go back to Judah, where Solomon's temple was built, because it's not in the territory that Jeroboam rules over. It's in the territory that Rehoboam rules over, because Rehoboam is Solomon's son. And part of the prophecy was that God would allow one of Solomon's children to rule over one tribe. So the tribe that he's able to rule over is the one where Solomon's national temple is. So Jeroboam, Solomon's previous employee, he's fearful that if these people keep going there to make sacrifices and worship, that they may become influenced to convert and serve Solomon's son, Rehoboam. So he makes these 2 calves so that people will want to stay there and worship, and it works. He also appoints priests and creates a holiday. Then we have 1 Kings 13, where the man of God has the prophecy, and we just read about that. So now we have 1 Kings chapter 14. In verses 1 through 3, Jeroboam's son Ahijah becomes sick. Jeroboam tells his wife to disguise herself and ask Ahijah the prophet for advice. Also, take him some food. Then we get from verses 4 to 18. Jeroboam's wife goes to visit Ahijah, and Ahijah could no longer see. The Lord told Ahijah, though, that she was coming, that she would be asking about her son, and that she's going to disguise herself. So in verse 6, Ahijah hears the woman's footsteps and he greets her, saying, come in, wife of Jeroboam. You're trying to pretend to be someone else. I have bad news for you. Your husband Jeroboam was selected to be Israel's king, but he dishonored God, so his lineage is going to be cut off. His sick child will die by the time that you return home. In addition, the Lord will raise up a king over Israel who will destroy Jeroboam's family. So in verses 17 and 18, Jeroboam's wife returns home and the child dies, and all Israel mourns the child's death in verse 18. We get to verse 19, and there's a book that does not appear in the Bible referenced again. So I'm going to address this again, but the history of the kings of Israel is not one of the 66 books of the Bible, but we see it being referenced directly here, talking about Jeroboam's reign. We learn that he reigned in Israel, or he was the king of Israel, for 22 years. When he dies, his son Nadab becomes the next king. Okay, so now we're here at verse 21. We are now talking about Solomon's son, and this is from verses 21 through 24. Rehoboam became king at age 41. He reigns for 17 years. His mother was Naamah, an Ammonite woman, and the importance of that is Genesis 19. This is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And if you remember at the end, Lot's two daughters get him drunk and have sex with him. And they produce these two inbred nations, the Ammonites and the Moabites. So Solomon's son Rehoboam, his mother, is an Ammonite, a descendant of this inbred population, all the way back in Genesis 19 from Lot. So it's just really cool putting these pieces together and seeing that those epic catalogs in Genesis were not just useless, that some of these people, they become their own nations and they become uh, adversaries to Israel. Verse 22, Judah sinned against God. They built pagan shrines. They set up sacred pillars or images, groves on every tree. I mean, it was just becoming such a big deal. They were turning against the one who gave them favor and gave them the land in the first place. Then we get to verse 24. There were male and female prostitutes. Verse 24. There were male and female prostitutes throughout the land. We saw in the King James Version that it said sodomites. Okay, they did according to all the abominations. So I just want to look up the word sodomy. A sodomite is a term of disparagement for a gay person, but personally, I believe that it's just referring to any sex that is not intended for reproductive purposes. But we do know that it is a term, usually a term of disparagement. But the reason why I say it's more than that is because when we look at verse 24, it's saying that the people imitated the pagan practice, the practices of the pagan nations that the Lord had driven from the land. And so when we go here, we look at Leviticus 18, this details the sex acts that were happening on the land. Okay? Do not act like the people of Egypt or like the people of Canaan. You must not imitate their way of life. Then we see all of these uh, practices. Don't have sex with your parents. Don't have sex with any of your father's wives, your sister. And then we get down to the end. All these detestable activities are practiced by the people of the land where I'm taking you. Okay, so that's how the land became defiled and it became sick. All right? So that's why I'm saying it's more than just prostitution or sodomy. It has to be more than that because I personally don't believe that those are the only sins people are going to commit. Uh, they're going to commit more sins than that, in my opinion. They're going to do all. All right. We get to verse 25. So this is deep. This is like a new section or something else happening. So King Rehoboam is Solomon's son. In his 5th year of leading, King Shishak attacks Jerusalem. He takes all the treasures of this temple that Solomon built. And so King Rehoboam replaced them with bronze shields, which way less valuable. And so whenever he went to the temple, they tried to guard them. And then we see a second book that we've never seen before mentioned that doesn't appear in the 66 books of the Bible, recorded in the book of history of the kings of Judah. There was constant war between Rehoboam, who was Solomon's son, and Jeroboam, who is Solomon's former employee. So when Rehoboam died, he was buried among his ancestors, and it just lets us know again that his mother was an Ammonite woman, one of those inbred descendants. And then his son Ahijah becomes the next king. So there are 2 new books that are not listed in the Bible, and it's just important because when these books are referenced, we see it again as narration. So we see this again, or we see this chapter 14, verse 29. The rest of the events and everything he did are recorded. We see there's not a speaker. This is just narration telling us what's additional information about Rehoboam. We see that same thing in verse 19. I did say that, the book of the history. As you see again, there's no speaker. This is just narration telling us more about Jeroboam. We get to 1 Kings 11:41. And we see the same thing here. The rest of the events of Solomon's reign are recorded in the book of the Acts of Solomon. Again, it's still referred to with that narration. There's no speaker, but the text directly points us to a book that does not appear in the Bible. So this is the 3rd book that doesn't appear in the Bible. And then lastly, we have the book of Jasher, and that's mentioned twice in the Bible. The first time I saw it was Joshua chapter 10, verse 13. And so we see that the same pattern. So the sun stood still. Is this event not recorded in the book of Jasher? So again, that narration, we don't have a speaker saying this. This is after Joshua speaks, because we see that text right here. So we have another book. And then again, this same book of Jasher is referred to in 2 Samuel 1, verse 18. Song of the Bow. Then David composed a funeral song for Saul and Jonathan, and he commanded that it be taught. It is known as the Song of the Bow. It's recorded in the book of Jasher. Now you see how this is referred to again. It's not David speaking right now. I think I misquoted that. I know I did. I just don't remember which video it was. But I said that David referred to this book directly, but he does not. This is narration. and it's saying what David did and what book it's recorded in, the book of Jasher. So all these books that are not, these four books, the Kings of Judah, Kings of Israel, Acts of Solomon, and Jasher, these books are referred to by narration and they don't appear in the 66 books of the Bible. So this is just something to note. I also wouldn't trust reading that myself. I would just read it as any other document. I would not read it with the same um it wouldn't hold the same weight as the Bible does. And to be honest, I don't want to say that, but I know that this Bible has been modified. All information has been modified multiple times. That's just what it is. It just takes reading through it to get some piece of what's left. Also, I want to be clear that Jeroboam is King Solomon's employee that God chooses to lead over Israel. Nadab is Jeroboam's son. Rehoboam is Solomon's son, who was Judah's leader. Rehoboam only rules over one group of Israel. Abijam is Rehoboam's son. He's going to be the new leader after Rehoboam dies. Thank you so much for clicking on the video. I love you. Have a wonderful day.